"There is nothing in this house that belongs to you." Cyrus said it with his hat still on his head, standing in the middle of his dead brother's kitchen on a wet morning in May, and Hester Vane went on slicing bread as though he had remarked on the weather. "Before we begin, tell me in the comments which town or city you are listening from. I always love to see where you all are." Hester was 31 and a widow of 4 of those years, and she had learned that the cruelest sentences in the English language are almost always delivered by people who believe they are being helpful. "You will want to think about your situation," Cyrus went on. He was Daniel's older brother, a corn factor over in Sherborne, a man who wore good wool and kept his gloves indoors. Daniel had this cottage because Daniel was the schoolmaster, and the school belongs to the Ashmere estate. Daniel has been dead for 4 years. Now the old Duchess is buried, and the new Duke is coming down from London to live in the place at last. New agent, new books, new eyes, and a woman living rent-free in a schoolhouse cottage with no school in it is exactly the sort of thing new eyes find first. Hester set down the knife. She had paid no rent because there had been nobody to pay it to. The old Duchess was 80 and had not left her own 2 rooms in 6 years, and the estate had simply forgotten the cottage on Ford Lane the way a large man forgets a button. "What would you have me do, Cyrus? Come to Sherborne. I have a house, and no wife in it since Anne died, and 3 children who need a woman's hand. As your housekeeper. As my brother's widow," he said, and there was a small tightening round his mouth, because they both heard the difference, and neither of them said it aloud. There would be an end to that business in the market square, of course. A Vane sitting out at a table in the open like a tinker, taking pennies off farm boys. Do you know what people say? They say, "I write a clear hand," said Hester. "They are right." He waited for more, and there was no more, because she had learned young that silence cannot be quoted back at you. After a while he told her he would write and put his hat straight, and went out into the rain. Hester stood in the kitchen and did not cry. She had cried enough in the winter Daniel died to last her the rest of her life. Instead, she went to the dresser, took down the flat tin box that had been her father's, and opened it. Inside, in their paper wrappings, lay 24 steel pen nibs, black and bright and perfectly ordered. Her father had been a printer in Bristol who put her to setting type before she was 10, and every morning of her childhood he had said the same thing to her, standing at the case with ink to his wrists. "A clear hand is a kindness, Hester. Most people in this world are only trying to be understood." She closed the tin and took her cloak off the hook, because it was Friday, and on Friday she worked. The market square at Denbury was cobbled and slanted, and smelled on a wet day of wool and wet straw. Hester's table stood in the angle of the church wall where the eaves kept the rain off, and it had stood there every Friday for 11 years, first Daniel's and then hers. It held a writing case, an inkwell, a stone to weigh the paper, and a small tin cup, and on the front hung a card in her own upright letters written and read, 1 penny, no charge for the poor. By 9 o'clock there were 4 people waiting, and that was the trade. People came to her with the words caught behind their teeth, and she took them down in her clear, upright hand and sent them out into the world to do their work. She wrote in the first person, always, "I miss you. I'm sorry. I cannot pay until the harvest. I'm not coming home." A letter in the third person is a document, and a letter in the first person is a human being, and a woman in service at Blandford does not want a document from her son. Which meant that every letter that left that table was in a voice that was not hers. There was no reason on earth for her to think about that, so she did not. The fourth person waiting was Jenny Ward. Jenny was 19, a farrier's daughter, with a round, anxious face and chapped hands, and she hung back until the square had thinned, which told Hester everything before a word was spoken. "Not here," Hester said. "Come round to the wall." They stood in the lee of the church, and Jenny said in a rush, "I want to send something, and I cannot have anybody know." "Nobody will know," said Hester. "Not from me, not ever, not to anyone, and not even if I am asked by a person who has a right to ask. Do you understand what I am promising you?" Jenny nodded and began to talk, and Hester wrote. At noon, Deborah Tuck came out of the bakehouse with 2 rolls in her apron and put one on the table without being asked. Deborah was 62, built like a gatepost, and had buried a husband and 3 of 5 children. "He came to you then," she said. "Cyrus." "And you said no." "I said nothing at all," said Hester, "which he will find out means no." Deborah made a sound in her throat, then looked across the square, where a carriage and 4 had come in under the arch of the bell. "Nobody in this county keeps 4 blacks like that," she said. "But the Ashmere estate." Hester looked up. The step had gone down, and a man got out who did not look like a duke at all, in a plain dark coat with the rein on his shoulders. He stood a moment in the middle of Denbury Market Square with his hands in his pockets, looking up at the church tower like a man deciding whether he liked it. Then he went into the inn, and the square let out its breath. Hester wrote a letter for a shepherd's widow about a disputed pair of gates, and thought no more about it until Wednesday, when the note came. His Grace the Duke of Ashmere requested Mrs. Vane to wait upon him at the park on Thursday morning at 10, on a matter concerning the estate. She read it twice. Then she got out her good dress, which was dark green and 8 years old and had been turned once, and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to be frightened. Ashmere Park stood 2 miles out along the Sherborne Road, and Hester walked it because there was no other way, and because she wanted the 2 miles. Up close, the house had the particular deadness of a place where nobody has opened a window in 6 years. Half the shutters were still up, there were rooks in the chimneys, and on the gravel stood a wagon, half unloaded with crates of books, sitting out in the damp. A servant took her along a corridor with pale rectangles on the walls where pictures had been, opened a door, said, "Mrs. Vane, Your Grace," and shut it behind her. The estate office looked as though a wave had gone through it. Every surface was under paper, and in the middle stood a very large desk with a man behind it in his shirt sleeves. He got up at once, tall, broad through the shoulder, dark hair going grey at one temple, and the look of a man ordinarily cheerful who had not slept. "Mrs. Vane, thank you for walking out here. I am told it is 2 miles, and there is no way to send for you, and both of those things are going to change." "Your Grace?" said Hester, and curtsied. "Yes." He said it with mild distaste. "I have had that for 3 years, and I have not gotten used to it. Sit down, if you can find anywhere." She moved a bundle of papers and sat. "I am going to be blunt," he said, "because I have no talent for hinting, and every attempt I make at it goes wrong. Do you know what these are? I could not say, sir. Letters, written to this estate by the people who live on it, since my cousin died and left the whole of it to a lawyer and a sick old woman. 9 years of them, failed and never answered." He picked up a handful and let them fall. "There are men here asking for leave to mend a wall who have been dead for 6 years. I have read perhaps 200 since Monday, and I have one question, and you are the only person I could think of to ask." He slid a single sheet across the desk. "Who wrote this?" Hester looked down at it and felt the floor go quiet underneath her. It was a letter from a tenant named Josiah Ball about a flooded lane and a culvert wanting clearing. The words were Josiah's. She could hear him saying them. The hand was hers. "I did," she said. "Yes, I thought as much." He pulled a second bundle onto the desk, and a third, and this, and these, and a great many more. A whole parish talking to this estate for 9 years, all in one hand, and the hand is yours. I write for people who cannot write, sir. On Fridays, in the market square. 1 penny. And do you read them what comes back? Yes, and when nothing comes back, then I read them nothing, she said, and they know what that means, and after a while they stop asking me to write. Something in his face changed. It was not anger, and it was not embarrassment. It was the look of a man who has just been shown the size of a hole in his own hull. "Every lawyer I have had in 3 years has told me this estate is sound," he said. "And it is sound. The rents come in. The books balance." He tapped the papers. "And underneath that, for 9 years, a parish has been writing to us and we have not answered. And the only reason anybody alive knows what was asked is that a woman with a good pen sat in the rain outside a church and took it down. That is worse than a fraud. A fraud I could take to a magistrate. This is nobody's crime at all. It is simply nobody having bothered." "You will want to know why I sent for you," he said. "I assumed you had come to the cottage on Ford Lane in your review of the tenancies." He looked at her blankly. What a cottage on Ford Lane! She could have let it lie. She never afterward knew quite why she did not. "The schoolhouse cottage," she said. "I have lived in it for 9 years. My husband was your schoolmaster. He died the winter before Waterloo, and the school has stood shut ever since. And I have paid no rent in 4 years, because there has been nobody here to pay it to. I would rather say it myself than have it found." There was silence. Then the Duke of Ashmere put his head back and laughed once and rubbed a hand down his face. "In 3 years I have had 200 people in front of me," he said, "and not one of them has ever answered a question I did not ask." He got up and went to the window. "There has been no school in this parish since before Waterloo." "None, sir. There is a dame school in Chapel Row, where Mrs. Pruitt takes the small ones for 2p and teaches them their letters and little beyond. The boys who want more go into Sherborne, if their fathers can find the fee and the coach. If they cannot, they go into the fields." He turned around. "I'm going to open it again," he said, "before Michaelmas." He said it the way another man might say he meant to move a chair. "That will be very well received," said Hester carefully. "It will not. It will be fought tooth and nail, and I have been ashore long enough to know it will be fought by somebody who tells me he agrees with me entirely." He came back to the desk. "In the meantime, I have 360 letters here that I want reading and sorting and answering. I cannot make out half of them. And the woman who wrote a third of them is walking 2 miles home in the rain. I would like to engage you. 3 days a week. 30 shillings a month, and I will send the gig." 30 shillings a month was more than twice what her father's small annuity brought her. "Your Grace, is this a charity?" He looked genuinely startled. "Why on earth would it be a charity?" "Because I have just told you I live in your house without paying for it, and because I am a widow of no consequence, and because kind men sometimes solve those 2 things at once and call it employment." "I spent 20 years in the Navy," he said. "When a man aboard can do a thing nobody else can do, you do not hand him a shilling out of pity. You give him the work, and you pay him what it is worth. There is not another soul in this county who can look at those letters and tell me what they say, and who said it, and what came of it. I'm not being kind, I am being extremely selfish, and I would rather you knew it." Hester considered him for a moment. Then she said, 35 shillings. He blinked. Then his whole face opened up. "Done," he said. "Thursday." She was halfway down the drive, walking fast with the rain in her face, when it occurred to her that she had just haggled with a duke, and she stopped in the middle of the wet gravel and laughed out loud where nobody could hear her. Alexander Thorne did not go back to the letters that afternoon. He went upstairs instead, unlocked the smaller of his 2 sea chests, and took out a flat packet of oilskin that had been to Lisbon and back and had never once been opened at sea. Inside were 9 letters. He had carried them 5 years and could have recited every one. The one on top was dated the 9th of March, written from a town in Dorset by a young man of 22 who could not hold a pen steadily enough to be read. His brother Edmund had been the clever one, and the charming one, and the disaster. He had crossed their father over a girl and a gambling debt in that order, and the quarrel ended with Edmund walking out of the house at 2 in the morning with no money and no coat. Then nothing. 7 months of nothing, while Alexander wrote from sea to every address he could think of. He came ashore at Plymouth half convinced his brother was dead in a ditch, and was standing on a wet quay when a boy brought him a letter, forwarded 3 times, in a hand so clear it might have been printed. It began, "Alec, I am alive and I am ashamed, and I have been trying to write this since October." It said Edmund had enlisted under another name, that he was Ned Vaughan of a line regiment now, and would be at Plymouth for the transports within the month, and that he had not written because there was nothing he could write that would not sound like begging. And near the end it said this: "I could not think how to say any of it until today, when a woman at a table in a market square told me that a letter is only a way of speaking to somebody who is not in the room, and that I should say the thing I would say if you were standing here, and she would write it down and not laugh at me." Alexander had ridden for 2 days. He found his brother in a barn outside Ivy Bridge with his boots off, and Edmund stood up and went white, and then neither of them could look at the other for a full minute. They had 3 days. 3 days in March, in the rain, walking and arguing and laughing more than either of them had laughed in 2 years. On the last morning Edmund said, at the top of a hill with the transports lying in the sound below them, "Well, whatever comes of it, we are square." And Alexander said, "We were always square, you idiot," and that was the last conversation they ever had. Edmund fell in Spain that July. For 5 years, Alexander had known, in a way he never tried to explain to anybody, that those 3 days were the most valuable thing he owned, and that he owed them to a stranger he had never met. He laid the March letter down beside Josiah Ball's complaint about the culvert. The same upright letters, the same small deliberate space before every capital, the same lowercase g, the tail coming round and stopping short, as though the writer had decided that a flourish was a waste of somebody else's ink. He thought about going straight downstairs and putting the letter in front of her, and he got as far as the door, and then he stopped. If he showed it to her now, everything that happened afterward would be built on top of it. She would be, for the rest of her life, the woman who gave him his brother back, and every kindness he did her would be a payment against a debt. She was quick enough to see that inside a minute, and proud enough to refuse everything that came after it. She had haggled him up 5 shillings that morning with a perfectly straight face, and he had liked her better in that moment than he had liked anybody in 3 years. So he put the letter back in the oilskin and the chest and locked it, and told his steward, Mr. Fenn, to have the schoolhouse opened up and swept out and the roof looked at. He would tell her at Christmas, he thought, when she had no reason left to think it was the reason. That was the 14th of May, and it was one of the few decisions of his life that he came to regret. The summer that followed was the strangest of Hester's life, and what she remembered of it afterward was not the great scenes, but the ordinary hours. 3 mornings a week, the gig came to the end of Ford Lane at 8:30, and she rode out to Ashmere with her father's tin box in her basket and worked until 4. She built a system. 360 letters, sorted by year, then by farm, then into 3 piles she labelled in her own hand, and that the Duke was calling by their labels inside a week. Answered. Too late. Still owing. Still owing was much the tallest. She wrote perhaps 200 letters that summer, every one over his signature and in her hand, which was, she thought once and then firmly put out of her mind, a peculiar sort of marriage. She taught him the way you learn anybody you work beside, that he could not bear to be flattered, and that he said exactly what he thought and then apologized for having said it, so that a conversation with him was a run of small collisions, followed by small courtesies. And he learned about her. That she never repeated one word of what she heard at that table, not even a harmless word, not even when he baited her with gossip to see what she would do. That she said, "I do not know," when she did not know, which he had come to think was one of the rarest sentences in England, that she was funny in a dry, sideways manner, and only let it out at about 11 in the morning, when the work was going well. On the second Thursday in June, he came in and found her at the window with a letter in her hand and her face wet. "Forgive me," she said, and wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist, entirely businesslike. "A woman in Bridport asking after a place. I wrote it for her the year my husband died. I never knew she had it." He set his hat down and did not look at her while she finished, which she was grateful for ever afterward. Then he said, "What was he like?" "Your husband." Nobody had asked her that in 4 years. People asked how she was managing. "He was a good man and not an easy one," said Hester, 15 years older than me. A schoolmaster from the age of 20, and he believed that if a boy could not learn a thing, it was because the master had not yet found the road into him. She folded the letter. He was ill for 9 days. "I am sorry," said Alexander. "Thank you." And then, because it was 11 in the morning and the work was going well, she added, "You did that better than most. Most people say it and then look at you until you make them comfortable again." He laughed, and the sound of it went off down the empty corridor, and Mr. Fenn, passing outside, stopped dead, because he had never in his life heard that noise in the house. Mr. Bertram Cole was the senior churchwarden of Denbury, a cloth merchant with a warehouse out on the Sherborne Road, and the man everybody in the parish had gone to for 20 years when they wanted something done. He was 50, well-fed, courteous, and held the sincere conviction common in such men that whatever was good for Bertram Cole was good for Denbury. He came out to Ashmere in June, agreed with the Duke about everything, and explained that his sister's boy, Rufus Kemp, would make an excellent master. He would not have the lads stuffed with Latin, mind. It put ideas in a boy that his station could not carry. "The vestry appoints the master," said Alexander, "and the vestry will choose in September." Then he said nothing else whatever, which was a thing he had learned at sea, and Cole filled the silence for 11 minutes and went away believing the matter settled. 2 days later, Cyrus wrote to the estate asking that the schoolhouse cottage be granted to him as his late brother's representative, the present occupant being a woman of no standing. Alexander answered it himself in 4 lines. The cottage was not vacant. The estate was satisfied with its tenant. The estate did not consider a woman who kept herself by honest work to be a person of no standing, and if Mr. Vane wished to discuss the family name, he might discuss it with the family concerned. He did not tell Hester. She heard it from Deborah Tuck 3 weeks later, who reported that Cyrus had gone the colour of a boiled beet. That was the week the town began to talk. The gig at the end of Ford Lane 3 mornings a week. The Duke stood in the market square on a Friday in July, in the rain, for 20 minutes, apparently to ask Mrs. Vane about a culvert, and Hester herself, who walked through Denbury now like a woman with somewhere to be. In July, Alexander asked her whether she would let her name go before the vestry in September. "The post carries £30 a year, and the cottage you already live in," he said. "It carries the school, and the right to tell Bertram Cole what the boys of this parish will and will not be taught. I have no vote in it, and I will not pretend to have, but I should like your name on the list." Hester did not answer for 3 days. Then she said she would think of it, which he correctly understood to mean yes, and which she did not yet dare say aloud. Bertram Cole came to her table on the last Friday in July, when the square was thinning. "Mrs. Vane, a word." She capped her ink. "Mr. Cole, I hear the vestry will have 3 names before it. My nephew, a young man out of Yeovil, and yours." "I have not given my answer," said Hester. "You will not need to," said Cole. "There has never been a mistress of that school, and there will not be one now. Boys of 13 and 14, farm lads. Every man on that vestry knows it cannot be done, and the only reason the notion has got this far is that his Grace has been 3 years a duke and 20 at sea, and does not yet know what a parish is." "Then the vestry will vote it down," said Hester, "and there is no need for you to speak to me about it at all." Cole smiled at her, And it was not an unkind smile, which was the worst of it. There is a point past which a person cannot be defended by anybody, he said, however highly placed. He set 2 fingers on the edge of her table. I should be very sorry to see you reach it. Mr. Cole, is there something you wish to say to me? There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Only that I have been going back through my warehouse papers, said Cole pleasantly. Every drawer, back to the year of Waterloo. It is remarkable what turns up, and it is remarkable, is it not, how easily one comes to know a person's handwriting. He touched his hat and walked away across the cobbles. Hester sat very still behind her small table with the church wall at her back, and for the first time in her life she looked at the tin cup of pennies and felt something cold go through her. We will pause here for just a moment. If this story is holding you, please take a second to subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you. Now let us go on. But she began that week to think properly about what she had been doing all those years, and she found that she could not sleep for it. Every private word anybody in that parish had been too frightened or too proud or too unlettered to write for themselves was set down in her hand, and a great many of them signed with no name at all, because people who are frightened do not sign things. Any one of those letters, held up in a room full of men, was a letter written by Hester Vane. She thought about that through the first days of August, and on the 4th of August, the Duke of Ashmere asked her to marry him. It happened in the schoolhouse, which was the ridiculous part. They had gone down to see the new desk set. The light came in low and yellow through the reglazed windows. The room smelled of sawdust and whitewash, and Hester walked between the rows with her hand along the desk tops. Daniel used to say a room should smell like a school by the 2nd week, and never again of the men who mended it, she said. He would have liked this. Alexander was standing by the master's table with his hands behind his back. Mrs. Vane, I am going to say something badly. You say most things badly, sir, and it has not hurt you yet. I want you to marry me. The room went entirely silent. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice. Hester stood with her fingers on the corner of a desk and did not turn round. I have been looking for a good way to do this, he said behind her, and there is no good way, so here it is plainly. I have a title I never wanted, and a house I cannot fill, and 4,000 people whose living runs through my hands, and I have found out this summer that I am no use at any of it on my own. That is not why. He stopped. That is not why at all, and I have gone and said it first, which is precisely the mistake I meant not to make. Hester turned round. Why then? Because you told me the truth before I asked for it. Because in 4 months I have never once heard you say a word about any living soul that you would not say to their face. Because you laugh at 11 o'clock and not before. He shook his head. Because I have not had a day since May, when I did not want to know what you would make of a thing. I'm not a young man, and I'm not a poet, and that is the whole of my case. She looked at him a long moment, and then she said, very low, I can't. I'm a widow. And Alexander Thorne said, without missing a beat, excellent. I will not have to duel anyone for you. Hester made a sound that was half a laugh and entirely a sob, and put her hand over her mouth. Forgive me, he said at once. That was flippant, and you meant it seriously, and I have been making jokes at the wrong moment my whole life. He came 2 steps closer and stopped. But I will not pretend to think it is an objection, because it is not one. You were somebody's wife for 5 years, and you were good at it, and he died, and there is nothing in that to be ashamed of. It is a reference. Nobody had called her Hester in 4 years. You have been in this county 11 weeks, she said, and her voice was not steady now. You have never had to sit in a room and hear what is said about a woman with no money and no family and no beauty left worth remarking on, who finds herself suddenly very much noticed by a rich man. If you marry me, it will be said of me until the day I die, and it will be believed because it is the likeliest story, and people always believe the likeliest story. Let them. You can afford to say that, she said. That is what a dukedom is. It is being able to afford to say let them. He said nothing, and she saw that she had landed something. And there is one more thing, and this is the true one. If I say yes to you now, before the vestry has sat, then everything I have done in this parish becomes the story of a woman who got herself a duke. Every letter I ever wrote for a frightened girl becomes a clever step on a ladder. I would very much rather be turned out of that cottage. Alexander stood in the yellow light in the empty schoolroom and did not argue with her, which she had not expected, and which very nearly undid her. Then he said, "Will you tell me one thing? If there were no vestry and no parish and no story, if it were only the two of us in this room." Hester looked at the floor for a while. "Then I would not have said I can't," she said. "I would have said something else entirely." "That will do," said the Duke of Ashmere. "That will do me for a good long while." And he picked up his hat and held the door for her, and they walked back up Ford Lane in the dusk, not touching and not talking, and Mrs. Pruitt saw them from her window and had it round the town by 9. Rosalind Cole came to the cottage on the last morning in August, and Hester, who had braced herself for spite, got something else. There was a man in Yeovil, an auctioneer's clerk, nobody at all, whom Rosalind had loved since she was 18 and never dared write to, because her father intended her for a duke. "They say you never repeat anything," she said. "Even my father says it, and he cannot abide you. Will you write to him for me?" "No," said Hester. "You are going to write it yourself, in your own hand, however badly it comes out. And then there is not a person alive who will ever be able to tell you those were not your words." Bertram Cole came on Thursday, and not to her table, but to her door, at 8 in the evening, with a folded paper in his hand. He stood on the step and held it up, so that she could see the fold of it and not the words. "I am a reasonable man," he said. "Withdraw your name, be out of Denbury by Michaelmas, and I will put this on my own fire tonight, and no living soul will ever know it existed. I will even find you a place. There is a family in Taunton who want a governess, and would take my word for you." "And if I do not," said Hester. "Then it will be read out in the vestry room in front of 40 people, said Cole, "and you will not be able to answer it." He waited. "I am not enjoying this, Mrs. Vane." "I believe you," said Hester. "I think that is the worst thing anybody has ever said to me. Good night, Mr. Cole." She shut the door and stood with her back against it in the dark of her own passage, and understood two things at once: that she was going to be ruined, and that he had just told her without meaning to, that he knew exactly whose words were on that paper, and had decided to use them anyway. The vestry met on the 11th of September at 7 in the evening, in the room behind the chancel where the parish chest stood against the wall. 9 men were entitled to sit. About 40 more came anyway and stood at the back. Deborah Tuck got there at 5 to be sure of a place. Hester sat on a bench by the door with her hands in her lap. Alexander sat at the far end as a parishioner and nothing else, because the endowment gave him no vote. They took the Yeovil man first, then Rufus Kemp, and then Mr. Pryor read out the third name, and there was a shifting all round the room. Bertram Cole rose. "Before we go on," he said, "there is a matter I must lay before this vestry, and God knows I take no pleasure in it." He drew the folded paper from his coat. "This came into my hands in July, among my warehouse accounts, in the desk of a young man I employ, Owen Shaw, 19 years of age. It is undated, it is unsigned, and the hand will be known to every man in this room." He read, "My dear O, I will come down to the gate by the lower field on Thursday at 9, and if you are not there I shall understand, and I will not think less of you. Do not write to the house. I do not care what my father says. I have never cared. I only wanted you to have it in your own hand, and not out of somebody else's mouth." There was no sound at all in the vestry room. "Gentlemen," said Cole, "we are asked tonight to set a woman of 31 over the boys of this parish, and here is a letter in her hand appointing a private meeting with a lad of 19 and telling him not to write to the house. I would be failing you if I said nothing." "Mrs. Vane," said Mr. Pryor unhappily, "you may answer." Hester stood up. She stood up very slowly, and she was white and perfectly steady, and every person in that room could still describe it 30 years later. "The hand is mine," she said. "I wrote that letter. I wrote it at my table by the church wall on a Friday in the spring." She looked at Cole. "The words are not mine, not one of them. In all the time I have sat at that table, I have never once written a letter of my own from it. Everything that leaves it is somebody else's voice. I put it down as I am speaking, because that is how people speak, and a girl who cannot write does not want a document. She wants to be heard." "Then give the vestry the name," said Cole. "No," said Hester. "Mrs. Vane," said the vicar. "If a name would clear you." "It would," said Hester, "and I will not." She turned so that she was speaking to the whole room and not to the 9 men at the table. "Some of you are standing in here tonight," she said. "You came to me because you could not write, or because you could write perfectly well and could not find the words. And every one of you asked me the same question before anything else. You asked whether it would go any further, and every one of you got the same answer. Not from me, not ever, not to anyone, and not even if I am asked by a person who has a right to ask. If I save myself in this room tonight by handing over a name, then that answer was never worth anything, and every letter I ever wrote was a lie at the moment I wrote it. Mr. Cole may have me be what he likes." She turned to the vicar. "I withdraw my name from the vestry's consideration, and I am sorry to have wasted the parish an evening." She sat down, and a chair scraped at the back of the room. Jenny Ward stood up. Her face was scarlet, and her hands were shaking so badly that her mother caught hold of her arm, and she pulled it free. "These are my words," she said. The whole room turned. "I said them to Mrs. Vane by the church wall in April, and she wrote them down and told me I had nothing to be ashamed of. It is Owen Shaw. It has been Owen Shaw for 2 years, and my father will not have it, and there is nothing wicked in it." She was crying now and went on talking straight through it. She has known since April and never told a living soul, and she was going to sit there and let you all think it was her. For a moment, Bertram Cole did not move at all. Then he said, in the gentlest voice he had used all evening, and it was the gentleness that gave him away, "The child is fond of her." Jenny stopped. "Miss Ward is 19 and has known Mrs. Vane since she could walk," said Cole. "Of course she will stand up. I should think less of her if she did not, but we cannot appoint a schoolmistress on the word of a girl who would say anything in the world to spare a woman she is fond of, and every man at this table knows it." He turned back to the vestry. "There is one hand on that paper, and one only, and no amount of kindness alters it." And Jenny Ward, 19, with her mother holding her sleeve, had nothing left to say because there was nothing left to say. That was the whole trap. There was never any way to prove whose mouth a hand had written from. Then the Duke of Ashmere stood up at the back of the room. "Mr. Pryor," he said, "I have no vote here. I ask to leave to speak as a man who lives in the parish." The vicar, who at that moment would have granted him leave to set fire to the roof, said, "Your Grace." Alexander came forward with a paper in his hand, folded and unfolded so often that it had gone soft along the creases. 5 years ago last March, he said, I was a naval lieutenant on the quay at Plymouth, and I had not heard from my younger brother in 7 months. He had quarrelled with our father and gone off in the night, and I did not know whether he was above ground. And a boy brought me this. He unfolded it. I am going to read 4 lines and no more, and I want it understood that I have the right to read them, because this letter was written to me. It is the only confidence in this room that is mine to break. He read, Alec, I am alive, and I am ashamed, and I have been trying to write this since October. I do not want anything from you. I want you to know that I did not simply vanish out of contempt. I could not think how to say any of it until today, when a woman at a table in a market square told me that a letter is only a way of speaking to somebody who is not in the room. He lowered the paper. That was written in this town by a soldier of 22 who was 3 days here on the march, who had no coat and who could not hold a pen. I did not know it until this May, when I found 360 letters in my own estate office in the same hand. He looked at Cole. I rode 2 days on the strength of that letter, and I found my brother. I had 3 days with him. He was killed in Spain that July, and the last thing he ever said to me was that we were square. He put the paper back inside his coat. I have had 5 years to think about what those 3 days were worth, and I will tell this vestry that there is not enough money in this county to buy them, and that I got them for 1 penny, from a table by that wall out there, in the rain. Mr. Cole has told you that a hand and a voice are the same thing. Gentlemen, I have just read you 4 lines in that same hand, and it was my brother speaking. Apply Mr. A. Cole's method honestly to me, and I am a private soldier of 22 who has been dead 5 years. That is what the method is worth, and he knew what it was worth when he carried it in here. Old Mr. Hobb got up next, with his hat in his hands. She has read my boy's letters out of Canada for 12 years, he said, to nobody in particular, and never took a farthing off me since my wife went. Then a woman from Chapel Row, who had never spoken in a public room in her life, said only, "She wrote to my sister for me when I could not," and sat straight down. Then Deborah Tuck heaved herself upright at the back and said, in a voice that carried out into the churchyard, "Bertram Cole, you have known that letter was Jenny Ward's since July, and you brought it in here regardless, and there is not a soul in this room that believes otherwise. Let us have done." And Rosalind Cole stood up. She said nothing at all. She walked the length of the vestry room, past her father, in front of 40 people, and sat down on the bench beside Hester Vane, and folded her hands and looked straight ahead. Bertram Cole stood in the middle of the room he had run for 20 years and understood all at once and completely that it had gone. The vestry voted at 8:20. 8 for Mrs. Vane. 1 abstention. Cole did not vote and did not speak again, and left before the register was signed. He gave up the wardenship at Christmas and put it about that his health required it, and there were people in Denbury charitable enough to accept that, and Hester was one of them, which infuriated Deborah Tuck for a fortnight. Cyrus wrote once more in October, a short, stiff letter of congratulation. Hester answered it kindly and sent with it Daniel's watch, which she had kept for 4 years and thought a man ought to have from his brother. He never thanked her for it. But he wore it, and by the following summer he was telling people in Sherborne that his sister-in-law had always been a remarkable woman. Hester and the Duke walked home the long way, past the schoolhouse and up Ford Lane, and for a 1/4 of a mile neither of them said anything. Then she said, "You have had that letter since May. Since the 14th of May. About 4 hours after you walked out of my office. Why did you not tell me?" He stopped walking. "Because if I had told you in May, everything I did for you afterward would have been a debt being paid off. You would have seen it inside a minute. You would have refused the work, and you would certainly have refused me." He put his hands in his pockets. "I wanted you to have the chance to be a woman I met in a room full of letters, and not the woman who gave me my brother back. I meant to tell you at Christmas, when you would have had no reason left to think it was the reason. Instead, I sat in that room tonight and watched you very nearly ruin yourself out of sheer stubbornness, and I have never been so frightened in my life, and I have been in 3 actions. Hester walked a few steps without answering. "I do not remember him," she said. "I know. I have been trying since the moment you began to read. I wrote for hundreds of people that year." She shook her head and her voice went, "He was the most important letter I ever wrote, and I cannot bring back his face. Hester, look at me. She looked at him. That is the point of view, he said. That is the entire point of view. It was not important to you. It was a Tuesday, and then Hester Vane, who had not remembered. He had no coat, she said slowly. Alexander went completely still. It was March and bitter, and there was a boy at my table in his shirt sleeves with a blanket off a horse round him, and I told him he would be ill. And he said his coat was 3 counties away, and it was nobody's fault but his own. And he could not hold the pen. He had it gripped in his fist like a spoon, and was so ashamed of it he could not look at me. So I told him he need not write it himself. I told him a letter is only a way of speaking to somebody who is not in the room. She put her hand over her mouth. He had a chip out of his front tooth, she said. He laughed and I saw it. Yes, said Alexander Thorne, and his voice was not steady either. He did that falling off a wall at 11 years old, and told our father it was a horse. They stood in the dark in Ford Lane for a long time. Then he said, I am going to ask you again, and it will be badly done. You have had 4 months to practice. It has not helped. Ask, she said. The vestry has sat, said Alexander. You have that school on your own merit in front of 40 witnesses, and there is not a person in this county who will ever be able to say it was given to you. You have your own roof and your own £30 a year, and you do not need me for one single thing, which I once said out loud, because it is the only reason I feel able to ask at all. Hester Vane, will you marry me? And Hester said, yes, just that. He waited for the rest of it, and there was no rest, and he laughed and put his hand over his eyes. 4 months, he said. 4 months, and a public trial in a vestry, and now, yes. You did tell me you had no talent for hinting. I did not think it was catching, said the Duke of Ashmere. They were married in Denbury Church in the first week of December by Mr. Pryor, who lost his place twice. Deborah Tuck stood up with her, and Rosalind Cole carried the flowers and married her auctioneer's clerk 18 months later. The school opened at Michaelmas with 31 children, and by the next year 53. Hester taught in it for 6 years, and she taught Latin, because Bertram Cole had once said that Latin put ideas in a boy that his station could not carry, and she had made a decision about that which she never went back on. The table by the church wall stayed exactly where it was. She sat it on Fridays for another 20 years, in a duchess's coat, with the same card and the same tin cup, and a penny was still a penny, and still no charge for the poor. In the spring of the 2nd year, a son was born at Ashmere Park, and they called him Edmund. And years afterward, an old woman, having her son's letter read to her for the 4th time, said to the Duchess of Ashmere that her Grace must have thought once that her life was finished. I did, said Hester. I thought it very sincerely for 4 years, and I was wrong. So here is the thing worth carrying away, and it has nothing to do with dukes. Hester Vane was 31, widowed with no money, no beauty anybody had troubled to remark on, no family who wanted her except on their own terms, and one small table by a church wall. She was told by a relative in her own kitchen that nothing in her life belonged to her and that there would be no more offers, and she went on doing the one thing she was good at, for a penny, in the rain, year after year, when nobody was watching and nobody was keeping score. But somebody is always keeping score. Not the people who talk about you, the people you were kind to on an ordinary Tuesday that you cannot even remember. That is the account that comes due, and it comes due at the exact hour when you have nothing left to defend yourself with, and it arrives in the shape of a room full of people standing up one after another to say, "She wrote for me." You are not too old. It is not too late. And the quiet work you have been doing all this time, that nobody has ever once thanked you for, is not wasted. It is only unread. One of these days somebody is going to open it. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story moved you, please leave a like and tell me in the comments which city or town you are watching from. and one thing you do for other people that nobody ever notices. I read every one of them. And if you are new here, please subscribe so you do not miss the next story. I will see you there.